We begin tonight with Flight 370. The major new clue, was it deliberately brought down?
On the night of March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 disappeared while carrying 239 people. There was no mayday call, no confirmed wreckage field, and no immediate explanation. Only silence remained. Over the next decade, investigators and governments spent more than $200 million scanning the ocean floor, yet the effort produced no definitive result. Now, retired British engineer Richard Godfrey says he has identified the aircraft's location using faint radio disturbances that almost no one had considered. Some scientists reject the idea outright.
How can you lose a jetliner? How can it vanish in thin air? We were clueless as to what could have caused this tragedy right under our noses in an era when we have the internet, satellite, radar communication.
Others have been surprised by how seriously it deserves to be examined. If his work is correct, the resting place of MH370 may finally be known. The real question is what he found, whether the method stands up to scrutiny, and whether the wreckage is truly there. The night the aircraft disappeared, MH370, a Boeing 777, departed Kuala Lumpur at 12:41 a.m. bound for Beijing. For the first part of the flight, everything appeared normal. The climb was routine, the radio traffic was ordinary, and nothing suggested an emergency. At 1:19 a.m., Malaysian Air Traffic Control instructed the crew to contact Vietnamese controllers as the flight moved into new airspace. The final words heard from the cockpit were calm and familiar. "Good night, Malaysian 370." 2 minutes later, the aircraft's transponder stopped transmitting. That meant civilian radar could no longer identify its position, altitude, or speed. To outside observers, it seemed to disappear instantly. But military radar told a different story. Investigators later concluded that Malaysian military radar continued tracking what was most likely MH370. Instead of following its route toward Beijing, the aircraft made a sharp, deliberate left turn. It crossed back over the Malay Peninsula and continued west toward the Andaman Sea. Military radar followed it until 2:22 a.m., when it disappeared northwest of Penang Island. After that, radar contact ended. There was no distress call, no emergency code, and no explanation. The satellite clues. Even though the aircraft stopped communicating with air traffic control, it still exchanged automated signals with an Inmarsat satellite over the Indian Ocean. These were not designed for flight tracking. They were maintenance handshakes, quiet system checks confirming the aircraft was still active. Those signals became the only reliable clues to MH370's path for the next 6 hours. There were 7 handshakes in total. Engineers analyzed 2 parts of the data: the burst timing offset, which measured signal travel time, and the burst frequency offset, which reflected Doppler-related frequency shifts. Using those values, investigators calculated large arcs showing where the aircraft could have been. One possible route extended north across Asia. The other stretched south into the Indian Ocean. The northern route was dismissed quickly. A Boeing 777 flying through that region would likely have been detected by military or civilian radar. That focused attention on the southern route. The final handshake, received at 8:19 a.m., defined what became known as the 7th arc. Investigators concluded that MH370 most likely ran out of fuel around that line and descended somewhere along it in the southern Indian Ocean. That assumption shaped one of the largest search operations in aviation history. The search that failed. Ships, aircraft, and underwater vehicles searched roughly 120,000 square kilometers of seabed. The effort lasted years and cost hundreds of millions of dollars, yet the main wreckage field was never found. Some debris did surface. A flaperon was discovered on Reunion Island. Other fragments appeared in Mozambique, Madagascar, Tanzania, Mauritius, and South Africa. These finds confirmed that the aircraft ended in the Indian Ocean, but they did not reveal the main crash site or explain what happened on board. And as the search continued without success, doubts grew. If the satellite analysis had been accurate enough to define the search zone, why had the aircraft not been found? That question became central to the MH370 mystery. The official theory and why it was questioned. Over time, a widely accepted explanation took shape. According to that theory, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah deliberately diverted the aircraft, turned off communications, depressurized the cabin, and flew south for nearly 7 hours until the fuel was exhausted. The plane then supposedly descended into the ocean in a final uncontrolled glide. It was a simple explanation, but the evidence did not fit perfectly. First, the last burst frequency offset readings did not point to a gentle glide. Reviews by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau suggested the aircraft may have been descending at rates of up to 15,000 feet per minute. That is not consistent with a controlled ditching. Second, the debris told a harsher story. The flaperon found on Runyan showed damage consistent with violent aerodynamic stress, including what experts described as flutter damage. Its flaps were retracted, which meant the aircraft was still in a cruise configuration rather than prepared for a water landing. Other recovered parts, including a wing flap section from Tanzania, also showed overload fractures associated with high energy impact. If the aircraft had been deliberately ditched in a controlled way, investigators would expect extended flaps, more intact major sections, and a different debris pattern. Instead, the evidence suggested a violent crash. Third, the search itself depended on several assumptions. Investigators assumed the Inmarsat data defined the route precisely. They assumed fuel burn and autopilot behavior matched the models. They assumed the seventh arc accurately marked the final area. As the years passed without a discovery, it became harder to ignore the possibility that the aircraft had simply not been where searchers were looking. Richard Godfrey's alternative approach. Richard Godfrey, a retired British aerospace engineer, believed the mystery needed a different method. He turned to a system called SPIR, short for Weak Signal Propagation Reporter. It is a network used by amateur radio operators around the world. Thousands of stations send very low power signals, often less than 1 watt, across long distances by bouncing them off the ionosphere. These signals are logged continuously in a large online archive called WSPR-Net. Godfrey's idea was unusual but straightforward. If a large aircraft crossed one of those radio paths, it might disturb the signal slightly, producing changes in strength or frequency. Those disturbances, he believed, could be detected in the archived data. So he began searching for them. Over 3 years, he analyzed more than 200 billion lines of WSPR-Net data. To do that, he built custom software to filter out false signals caused by solar activity, atmospheric effects, and general radio noise. He says he eventually identified about 130 anomalies over the Indian Ocean during the period when MH370 was missing. When he plotted them in sequence, they appeared to form a route beginning near the last military radar position, then curving southwest and turning south. Most importantly, that route ended at a specific point, 29.128 degrees south, 99. 934 degrees east. That is about 1,500 kilometers west of Perth, Australia, and roughly 200 kilometers inside an area that earlier searches had not covered. Testing the loose-spur theory. A new theory alone was not enough. Godfrey needed to show that the data could withstand closer scrutiny. He presented his findings to analysts at the University of Liverpool. One important test involved timing. His reported Woospur anomalies aligned within about 4 minutes of the known Inmarsat handshakes. That suggested the disturbances matched the aircraft's timeline rather than appearing randomly. Another test involved geometry. Inmarsat could only produce broad arcs, leaving vast areas to search. Woospur paths, by contrast, are fixed between radio stations. If several of those paths showed disturbances at the same moment, they could be intersected to narrow the aircraft's possible location into much tighter corridors. Godfrey also focused on 14 MHz signals, arguing that this frequency range reacts predictably when a large aircraft crosses it. His software rejected weak or uncertain events and kept only stronger signal disturbances. After filtering, he still had 130 anomalies that clustered into a route across the southern Indian Ocean. According to the analysis presented, Bayesian modeling by the Liverpool team produced a 74% probability that MH370 lay within a small search area centered on Godfrey's coordinates. That was not proof. but it was a stronger and more structured case than most theories that had appeared since 2014. The skepticism. Critics immediately raised objections. The first was obvious. Whisper was never created to track aircraft. That is true. It was built for amateur radio operators studying signal propagation. But the underlying physics is real. Even Joe Taylor, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist who developed Whisper, acknowledged that aircraft can disturb these signals, though he was more cautious about how precisely that effect could be used for location. The second criticism was that Godfrey's proposed crash site changed over time. Earlier estimates were near 33 and 34 degrees south before shifting to 29 degrees south. Critics said that looked like guesswork. Godfrey argued that the changes reflected improved data and better algorithms, and he noted that the target had reportedly remained stable at 29 degrees south for more than 14 months. The third and most important objection was that no wreckage had yet been recovered from that exact point. That remains true. Until part of the aircraft or the flight recorders are found there, the theory cannot be confirmed. Still, there is another line of support. Oceanographers at the Geomar Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research in Germany ran drift simulations using the debris already found on Reunion Island and along African coastlines. Their models suggested that many of those drift paths traced back to an origin area within about 100 kilometers of Godfrey's hotspot. That did not prove the case, but it meant that two independent lines of analysis pointed to nearly the same region. The search returns. After years of dead ends, the search is now moving back to that area. Ocean Infinity, the company that led the major private MH370 search in 2018, has returned with more advanced technology. Its support vessel, Armada 7806, carries Hugin autonomous underwater vehicles capable of diving to 6,000 meters and scanning the seabed in fine detail. Malaysia's government approved a new agreement with Ocean Infinity in January 2025 under Transport Minister Anthony Loke. The search area is a 15,000 square kilometer box centered on the location identified through the Whisper analysis. The contract is structured as no find, no fee. Ocean Infinity is funding the search up front at an estimated cost of about $70 million and will only be paid if the wreckage is located. That arrangement suggests the company believes the target is credible enough to justify the risk. Each Hugin vehicle can cover roughly 500 square kilometers per day while scanning the seabed. With multiple units operating continuously, the search box could be completed in about a month. For the first time in years, the effort is focused, technically defined, and backed by equipment capable of testing the theory directly. More than a decade after MH370 disappeared, the mystery remains unresolved. But the situation has changed. There is now a specific location, a method that claims to justify it, drift analysis that supports the same region, and a new search mission equipped to examine the seabed in detail. The question is no longer only how MH370 disappeared, it is whether the aircraft may finally be found. If this new search succeeds, one of modern aviation's greatest mysteries may at last move from speculation to evidence.